4.5 years ago, my world shattered. It's the kind of pain that doesn't just sting. It consumes you, rips apart everything you thought you knew. I can still feel the exact moment I saw the messages. The buzz of Jessica's phone on the kitchen counter, the way her expression changed when I picked it up, her quick lunge to snatch it from my hand. But it was too late. I had seen enough. The texts were explicit. Messages between her and her boss, Daniel Westbrook, the man she had always described as demanding and difficult. Now I understood why she stayed late at work, why her eyes lit up when his name appeared on her phone. Daniel wasn't just her boss. He was her lover. The pictures in her phone confirmed it. A photo of them at a rooftop bar, their faces close, smiles wide. Another of them in what looked like a hotel room, the bed rumpled in the background. My stomach turned as I scrolled through each image, each one a dagger to the chest. She tried to stop me, her voice high-pitched and panicked. "Ryan, it's not what you think," she cried, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone. "Not what I think," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "Jessica, it's exactly what I think. You're sleeping with him." Her face crumbled as the words left my mouth. She didn't deny it, couldn't even look me in the eye. "It just happened," she stammered, as if that was some kind of justification. He made me feel special. I didn't mean for this to go so far." "Special?" I repeated, my voice rising. "We've been married for 7 years. 7 years, Jessica. I loved you. I trusted you. Was that not enough?" She didn't answer, just stood there, tears streaming down her face. But her tears meant nothing to me in that moment. They couldn't erase the betrayal, couldn't undo the damage. All I could see was the woman I had vowed to spend my life with standing before me, confessing to throwing it all away for a man who treated her like a prize to be won. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in the house we had built together, not with her lies hanging in the air. I checked into a hotel, the anger and heartbreak twisting inside me like a storm. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, touching, kissing. The images haunted me, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. Over the next few days, I tried to make sense of it all. I replayed every moment of our marriage, searching for signs I had missed, clues that could have warned me. But there was nothing. Jessica had been perfect, at least, that's what I thought. Loving, supportive, the kind of partner who made me believe I had won the lottery. And now, I couldn't tell where the lies began and the truth ended. When I finally confronted her again, she tried to apologize, but her words rang hollow. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I still love you, Ryan." "Love?" I snapped, my anger boiling over. "You don't destroy the people you love, Jessica. You don't lie to them, cheat on them, humiliate them." She begged me to forgive her, to work through it, but I couldn't. The damage was done, and there was no repairing it. I filed for divorce the next day, determined to cut her out of my life for good. The process was brutal, not because I doubted my decision, but because it forced me to relive the betrayal over and over. Each meeting with the lawyer, each piece of paperwork, felt like a knife twisting deeper into the wound. But I pushed through it, fueled by the knowledge that I deserved better. Better than her, better than the lies, better than the life she had tried to create behind my back. When the divorce was finalized, I walked out of that courthouse feeling both empty and free. Jessica was no longer my wife. She was a stranger, someone I had once loved but no longer recognized. That night, I sat in the small apartment I had rented and stared at the boxes that contained what little I had taken from our house. It wasn't much, some clothes, a few books, my laptop, but it was enough. Enough to start over, to begin the process of rebuilding what she had destroyed. Looking back now, I can see that leaving Jessica was the best decision I ever made. At the time, it felt like the end of the world, like I would never recover from the pain she had caused. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something better. She had broken me, yes, but she hadn't destroyed me. And I was about to prove just how strong I could be. The months after the divorce were a blur of emotions: grief, anger, shame. I was humiliated by the betrayal, haunted by the images of Jessica and Daniel, and consumed by a toxic cocktail of self-doubt. How had I not seen it coming? What did Daniel have that I didn't? Questions like these circled in my mind endlessly, dragging me deeper into despair. At first, I barely functioned. I stayed in my small apartment, the boxes from my old life still unpacked. My work as a marketing consultant suffered because I couldn't focus. I ignored calls from friends and family, embarrassed to explain what had happened. I didn't even want to see my own reflection. Each glance in the mirror felt like a reminder that I wasn't enough. But life doesn't let you wallow forever. Bills pile up, clients demand attention, and the world moves on whether you're ready or not. Slowly, I began to claw my way out of the pit Jessica had left me in. I started small. Just showing up to work on time was an achievement at first. I'd sit at my desk, forcing myself to focus on campaigns and pitches instead of replaying the betrayal in my head. It was grueling, but each completed task felt like a small victory. One day led to another, and soon I found myself rebuilding not just my career but my sense of purpose. Support came from unexpected places. My sister, Amanda, was a constant source of strength. She showed up at my apartment one evening with takeout and refused to leave until I talked to her. "Ryan," she said, handing me a box of Thai food, "you can't let her win. You can't let her destroy you." "I'm not letting her win," I mumbled, though the hollow tone of my voice betrayed me. Amanda rolled her eyes. "Sitting here in the dark, drowning in self-pity? That's exactly what she'd want. You're better than this." Her words stung because they were true. Jessica's betrayal had made me feel powerless, but Amanda reminded me that I still had control over my own life. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ignite a spark inside me. I started going out again, reconnecting with old friends who welcomed me back without judgment. Derek, my closest friend from college, was relentless in dragging me out of my comfort zone. "You need a distraction," he said one night over beers. "Something to remind you that there's life beyond her." At his insistence, I signed up for a martial arts class, a mix of self-defense and fitness that quickly became a therapeutic outlet for my anger. There was something deeply satisfying about channeling my emotions into every punch and kick, every bead of sweat that dripped down my face. The physicality of it grounded me in a way nothing else could. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice changes in myself. The humiliation that had once consumed me was fading, replaced by a growing sense of determination. My body grew stronger, my mind sharper, and my confidence slowly returned. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Work became my refuge. I poured myself into my business, taking on new clients and projects that challenged me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Each successful campaign felt like a step forward, a reminder that I was capable of building something meaningful on my own. My reputation in the industry grew, and with it came opportunities one had only dreamed of before. But the most important transformation was internal. For so long, I had measured my worth through Jessica's eyes, seeking validation from a woman who had never truly valued me. Her betrayal forced me to confront a painful truth. I had spent years giving too much of myself to someone who didn't deserve it. Now, I was learning to prioritize my own happiness, to set boundaries, and to recognize my own value. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain crept back in, when I doubted myself and questioned if I could ever fully heal. But each time, I pushed through. I reminded myself of how far I'd come and how much further I could go. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of Jessica's betrayal was still there, but it was lighter now, no longer suffocating. For the first time, I realized that her actions hadn't destroyed me, they had freed me to focus on myself, freed me to rebuild, freed me to create a life that wasn't defined by someone else's choices. I wasn't the same man I had been before the divorce. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Jessica's betrayal had been a blessing in disguise, a painful but necessary step toward a better future. As I finished my drink and stepped back inside, I couldn't help but smile. The life I was building wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. As the days turned into months, I started hearing whispers about Jessica and Daniel. It was inevitable, really. People love to talk, especially when the drama involves someone who once flaunted their perfect life for all to see. Jessica, it seemed, was thriving. Or at least, that's what she wanted the world to believe. The first rumor came from Amanda, my sister, who casually mentioned seeing a photo of Jessica on social media. She was standing next to Daniel at some high-profile event, her dress shimmering under the bright lights of the camera flashes. They looked happy, Amanda said, but the hesitation in her voice told me she wasn't convinced. I knew Jessica well enough to understand her patterns. She was a master of appearances, a chameleon who could adapt to any situation to maintain the image she wanted others to see. So when I started hearing about the lavish gifts, the luxury vacations, and the opulent parties, I wasn't surprised. Jessica was living the life she'd always dreamed of, a glittering facade built on the shallow foundation of Daniel's wealth and influence. At first, the news stung. It was hard not to compare her seemingly glamorous life with my quieter, more grounded existence. I'd lie awake some nights, wondering if she ever thought about what we'd had, if she regretted the choices she'd made. But deep down, I knew better. Jessica had always craved more attention, more excitement, more validation. And Daniel, with his arrogance and charisma, had given her that, at least for now. But the thing about people like Daniel is that their interest is fleeting. Men like him don't fall in love, they conquer. They collect trophies, basking in the glow of their latest acquisition until something shinier comes along. Jessica, for all her charm and beauty, was just another prize for him to show off. I could see it even if she couldn't, or maybe wouldn't. The realization hit me one evening as I scrolled through my phone. A mutual acquaintance had posted a video from one of Daniel's infamous parties, a glamorous affair filled with glittering chandeliers and designer-clad guests. There was Jessica, standing at his side, laughing at something he said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her body language told a different story, stiff, almost guarded, as if she were playing a role rather than genuinely enjoying herself. I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for her. She had traded our life, imperfect but real, for a world where her value was determined by her ability to enhance Daniel's image. She wasn't his partner. She was his accessory, a prop to bolster his ego and status. But pity didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't erase the pain she'd caused or the damage she'd left in her wake. So instead of dwelling on what she had become, I focused on what I was building. My business was thriving, my friendships were stronger than ever, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my life. Jessica's choices no longer defined me. I was forging my own path, and it was one I could walk with pride. Still, the rumors persisted. Some said Daniel was grooming Jessica for a prominent position in his company, a move that would solidify her place in his world. Others claimed he was already growing bored of her, flirting openly with other women at events and treating her as an afterthought. The stories were conflicting, but they all painted the same picture. A relationship built on superficiality, destined to crumble under the weight of its own emptiness. The truth, I suspected, lay somewhere in between. Jessica had always been resourceful, and I had no doubt she was doing everything in her power to keep Daniel's attention. But even the most elaborate acts can only hold an audience for so long. And Daniel, with his insatiable need for new conquests, was bound to look elsewhere eventually. For a long time, I wrestled with how I felt about it all. Part of me wanted to see her fall, to watch as the life she had chosen came crashing down around her. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still remembered the woman I had once loved, just wanted her to find peace, even if it was in the ruins of her glittering lie. As the months rolled on, the whispers grew louder, and the cracks in Jessica's perfect life became harder to ignore. People began to notice the way Daniel spoke to her, dismissive and condescending. They saw the way she lingered on the outskirts of conversations, her laughter hollow and forced. And I, watching from a distance, began to understand something profound. Jessica's choices were hers to live with, just as mine were mine to rise from. She had made her bed, and she was lying in it, no matter how uncomfortable it had become. And as I turned my attention back to my own life, I realized I no longer needed to know every detail of hers. Jessica's glittering lie might have dazzled the world for a time, but its luster was fading, and in the end, it would leave her with nothing but emptiness. The rumors about Jessica and Daniel became harder to ignore, and I started piecing together the cracks in their so-called perfect life. I wasn't actively seeking information, but people love to talk, especially when it came to someone as flashy and polarizing as Daniel Westbrook. The stories always followed the same pattern. Lavish parties, extravagant vacations, and public displays of affection that seemed more performative than genuine. At first, I didn't care. Jessica had made her bed, and I was too busy rebuilding my life to dwell on hers. But as the months turned into years, the details began to paint a picture that was impossible to ignore. Jessica wasn't living the dream she had betrayed me for. She was living in a gilded cage, one where her worth was tied entirely to her ability to enhance Daniel's image. One story, in particular, stuck with me. A former colleague of hers, someone who had always been friendly but distant, reached out to me unexpectedly. We met for coffee, and after some polite small talk, she leaned in and said, "I don't know if you've heard, but Jessica, she's not doing so well." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she was getting at. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I ran into her at a party a few weeks ago. She was with Daniel, of course, but she didn't look like herself. She seemed tired, worn down. And the way Daniel treated her," she shook her head. "It wasn't good, Ryan. He was dismissive, almost cruel." I nodded, filing the information away without comment. It wasn't surprising, but hearing it confirmed by someone who had seen it firsthand added weight to the rumors. Jessica had traded a stable, if imperfect, life for the fleeting highs of Daniel's world, and now she was paying the price. More stories trickled in over time. At events, Daniel paraded her around like a trophy, introducing her to his friends with a smug sense of ownership. But when the conversations turned serious, when the spotlight wasn't on them, he treated her like an afterthought. She was there to serve a purpose, to make him look good, and nothing more. I could almost imagine the scene. Jessica, once vibrant and full of life, reduced to a shadow of herself, her laughter forced, her smile hollow. It was hard to reconcile this image with the woman I had loved, but it wasn't my responsibility to save her. She had made her choice, and this was the life she had chosen. One particularly telling moment came during a charity gala that Daniel had hosted. I wasn't there, of course, but the event was covered in the local papers, and the photos told a story all their own. Daniel stood at the center of the room, surrounded by admirers, his arm draped casually around Jessica's waist. She was stunning, as always, dressed in a gown that probably cost more than most people made in a month. But her eyes gave her away. They were tired, distant, as if she were somewhere else entirely. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to make sense of the emotions it stirred in me. Part of me felt vindicated. She had left me for this life, and now it was clear that it wasn't what she thought it would be. But another part of me felt something more complicated, something closer to pity. Jessica had always craved attention, validation, the kind of adoration that Daniel's world promised. But now that she had it, she was discovering just how empty it all was. Still, pity didn't erase the pain she had caused. It didn't undo the nights I had spent questioning my worth, or the years I had lost rebuilding what she had destroyed. If anything, it made me more determined to continue moving forward, to prove to myself that I didn't need her or her approval to find happiness. The final confirmation of the cracks in Jessica's perfect life came from a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same industry as Daniel. Over drinks one night, they casually mentioned that Daniel had been seen with another woman. Someone younger, flashier, and even more willing to stroke his ego. "Jessica doesn't know yet," they said with a wry smile. "But she'll find out soon enough. Daniel's not exactly subtle." I nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. It wasn't surprising, but it was still a stark reminder of how little Daniel valued her. To him, Jessica wasn't a partner or an equal. She was a placeholder, someone to fill the void until something better came along. As I left the bar that night, I felt a strange sense of closure. Jessica's life with Daniel wasn't the dream she had imagined. It was a shallow, hollow existence, one that left her more isolated and insecure than ever. And while I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anyone, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that she was finally facing the consequences of her choices. Jessica had wanted more, and she had gotten it. But now, as the cracks in her perfect life grew wider, it was clear that more wasn't enough. And as for me, I was finally free to live a life defined not by betrayal, but by resilience and growth. The years following my divorce weren't easy, but they were transformative. I took the pain Jessica had left behind and used it as fuel to rebuild my life. Slowly but surely, the broken pieces began to form something stronger, something better than I could have imagined. My business, which had been struggling during the turmoil of my personal life, became my sanctuary. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office, brainstorming new strategies, and taking risks I never would have before. It wasn't just about proving something to myself. It was about creating something lasting, something I could be proud of. And it worked. My company grew, and with it, so did my reputation. The turning point came when I landed a high-profile client, one that put me on the map in my industry. Suddenly, I wasn't just Ryan Carter, the guy trying to rebuild after a messy divorce. I was Ryan Carter, a respected entrepreneur with a thriving business. Invitations to conferences and networking events started rolling in, and I found myself surrounded by people who respected me for what I'd accomplished, not for who I had been. But my growth wasn't limited to my career. I started focusing on myself in ways I never had before. I hired a personal trainer, not just to get in shape, but to regain the confidence that Jessica had chipped away. I spent weekends hiking, exploring trails that challenged me physically and mentally. I took up photography, finding beauty in the world around me and capturing moments that reminded me of the life I was creating. One of the most significant changes came in my relationships. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage, people who had always been there but who I had neglected in favor of Jessica's world. Amanda, my sister, remained my rock, constantly reminding me of my worth and pushing me to keep moving forward. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when the memories of what I'd lost threatened to pull me back into the darkness. But each time, I reminded myself of how far I'd come, of the life I was building without Jessica. Her betrayal had been a catalyst, but it didn't define me. I was determined to be defined by my resilience, by my ability to rise above the pain and create something new. For years later, I was unrecognizable, not just in appearance, but in spirit. I was no longer the man who had been shattered by betrayal. I was stronger, more confident, and more self-assured. And that's why, when I received an invitation to an exclusive party hosted by a business partner, I felt a rare sense of peace. It was the kind of event that Jessica would have thrived at, a glamorous affair filled with powerful people and endless networking opportunities. But this time, I wasn't going to prove anything to anyone. I was going because I wanted to, because I deserved to be there. The evening of the party, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. The man staring back at me was a far cry from the one who had sat on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by boxes and broken dreams. This man was composed, successful, and ready to face whatever the night might bring. When I arrived at the venue, I was struck by the grandeur of it all. The room was filled with people dressed to the nines, the hum of conversation and clinking glasses creating a vibrant atmosphere. I made my way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries and catching up with colleagues. It was the kind of environment that used to intimidate me, but now, I felt completely at ease. I was halfway through a conversation with an investor when I spotted her. Jessica. She was standing on the other side of the room, surrounded by Daniel and his cronies. She looked stunning, as always, dressed in a gown that hugged her figure perfectly. But there was something off about her. Her laughter was forced, her smile tight, and her eyes, they looked hollow. I watched as Daniel introduced her to someone, his hand resting possessively on her waist. She nodded and smiled, but her body language screamed discomfort. She was no longer the vibrant, confident woman I had once loved. She was a shadow, a trophy on display for Daniel's benefit. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. Jessica had chosen this life, but it was clear she hadn't anticipated the cost. She had traded a partnership built on love, and trust for one built on appearances and control. And now, she was paying the price. But that pity was fleeting. As I turned my attention back to my conversation, I felt a sense of pride. I had risen from the ashes of our marriage and built a life I could be proud of. Jessica's choices no longer mattered to me. What mattered was the man I had become, the life I was living, and the future I was creating. That night, as I left the party, I couldn't help but smile. Jessica was trapped in the glittering facade she had chosen, but I was free. Free to live, to grow, and to thrive. And for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Walking into that party, I felt a quiet confidence I hadn't known in years. The buzz of conversations, the clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of live jazz in the background. It was a scene designed to dazzle. But I wasn't here to be dazzled. I wasn't here to prove anything to anyone, least of all to myself. I was here because I had earned my place, because I belonged in this room filled with success and ambition. I made my way through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings and shaking hands with people I had worked with or admired from a distance. The old Ryan would have felt out of place, like an imposter in a world too polished and too perfect. But not this Ryan. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, and I carried myself with the knowledge that I had fought to be here. And then I saw her. It was like the air shifted, the noise in the room fading into the background as my eyes landed on Jessica. She was standing near the bar, a glass of champagne in her hand, surrounded by a group of people who were clearly part of Daniel's circle. She looked almost exactly as I remembered, elegant, poised, effortlessly beautiful. But there was something different about her, something I hadn't noticed in the photos or heard in the rumors. She looked tired, not just physically, though the faint lines around her eyes and the stiffness in her posture suggested she wasn't sleeping well. No, it was more than that. It was the way she carried herself, the way her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes, the way her gaze darted around the room as if searching for an escape. She looked like a woman trapped in a life she no longer wanted but didn't know how to leave. And then there was Daniel. He stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. His presence was commanding, his demeanor as smug and self-assured as ever. He was the kind of man who thrived on being the center of attention, who measured his worth by the size of his audience and the number of people willing to stroke his ego. Jessica wasn't his partner. She was his accessory, a trophy to be displayed and admired but never truly valued. I watched as Daniel introduced Jessica to someone, his tone dismissive, his attention already drifting to someone more important. She nodded politely, her smile thin and forced, and I wondered if she even realized how far she had fallen from the life she once had. The life she had thrown away. She saw me then. Her eyes met mine across the room, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of recognition, the tightening of her jaw, the slight widening of her eyes. She hesitated, her body stiffening as if she wasn't sure whether to approach me or pretend she hadn't seen me. I held her gaze, unflinching, and after a long pause, she started walking toward me. "Ryan," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. Up close, the cracks in her facade were even more apparent. She looked thinner, her skin paler, her expression tinged with something that might have been regret. "Jessica," I replied, my tone calm but detached. I wasn't here to make a scene, and I wasn't interested in rekindling old wounds. But I also wasn't going to let her control the narrative. She fidgeted with the stem of her glass, her eyes darting around the room before settling on me. "I didn't expect to see you here." I raised an eyebrow. "Likewise." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was heavy, charged with the weight of everything that had happened between us. Finally, she spoke. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling, "for everything. I know I hurt you, and I've regretted it every day since." Her words should have meant something. They should have stirred some kind of emotion in me. Anger, sadness, forgiveness. But instead, I felt nothing. I realized then that I had moved on, truly and completely. Jessica's apology wasn't for me. It was for herself, a way to absolve her guilt and make peace with her choices. I met her gaze, my voice steady and even. "You made your choices, Jessica, and I made mine. We're both where we're meant to be. Her face crumbled, the faint hope in her eyes extinguished by the finality of my words. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I nodded once, a polite but firm farewell, and walked away. As I moved through the crowd, I felt lighter than I had in years. Seeing Jessica again hadn't been the painful encounter I had feared. It had been closure. She was no longer the woman who had broken me. She was just someone from my past, a reminder of how far I had come and how much I had grown. That night, as I left the party, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Jessica was still trapped in the glittering world she had chosen, a life that looked perfect on the surface but was hollow at its core. But I was free to live, to grow, and to embrace the future I had built for myself. And for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. As I walked out of the party that night, the image of Jessica's hollow eyes and forced smile lingered in my mind. Seeing her in Daniel's orbit, passed around like a trophy, didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. I'd moved on, built a life I was proud of, and her downfall wasn't my triumph. It was just confirmation that the choices we make define us. But it wasn't over yet. Jessica, as I would soon discover, wasn't ready to let go. It started with a text. Late one evening, after I'd finished up some work and settled on the couch with a book, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a number I hadn't seen in years. Jessica, Ryan, I need to talk. Please call me. I stared at the message, debating whether to respond. Part of me was curious. What could she possibly have to say now, after all this time? But the stronger part of me knew better. Engaging with her would only reopen wounds I had worked so hard to heal. I deleted the message without replying, but she didn't stop there. Over the next week, more texts followed, each one more desperate than the last. I made a mistake. I need to fix this. Ryan, please. Just one conversation. I can't stop thinking about you. About us. It was almost laughable. Jessica, who had discarded me so easily, now begging for my attention. I ignored her messages, confident that she would eventually give up. But then came the call. It was a Friday night, and I was having dinner with Amanda and her fiancé, Peter. We were laughing, sharing stories about our week, when my phone vibrated on the table. I glanced at the screen, and there it was again. Her name. Amanda noticed the change in my expression. "Who is it?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Jessica," I said, my voice flat. Amanda rolled her eyes. "Let me guess. She suddenly realized what she threw away?" I nodded, silencing the call and putting my phone face down on the table. "She's been texting too. I've ignored her so far." "Good," Amanda said firmly. "You don't owe her anything, Ryan. She made her bed. Let her lie in it." She was right, of course. But as much as I wanted to close the door on Jessica entirely, part of me couldn't help but wonder what had pushed her to this point. What had changed in her life to make her reach out to me, after all these years? The answer came a few days later. It was another text, but this one was different. There was no pretense, no begging. Just a single line that sent a chill down my spine. "Daniel left me." I read the words over and over, half expecting them to change. Daniel left her? The man who had swept her off her feet, who had promised her a life of luxury and excitement, was gone? I could almost hear the desperation in her voice as I imagined her typing the message. But I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Her life with Daniel had been a house of cards, and it had finally come crashing down. She was searching for something to hold on to, someone to save her from the wreckage. But I wasn't that person. Not anymore. Jessica's attempts to contact me escalated after that. She left voicemails, each one more frantic than the last. She even showed up at my office one afternoon, uninvited and unannounced. My assistant, Clara, intercepted her at the front desk, politely but firmly turning her away. When Clara told me what had happened, I felt a mix of frustration and pity. Jessica was spiraling, grasping at straws, and I was her last hope. But I couldn't give her what she wanted. My life wasn't hers to invade anymore. Her desperation reached its peak a week later when she showed up at my apartment. It was late, close to midnight, when the pounding on my door woke me. I opened it to find Jessica standing there, her makeup smeared, her hair disheveled, and tears streaming down her face. Ryan, she said, her voice trembling. I have nowhere else to go. I stared at her, a mixture of anger and disbelief coursing through me. You shouldn't have come here, Jessica, I said, my tone cold. Please, she whispered. Just hear me out. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me to ensure she wouldn't disturb the peace of my home. What do you want, Jessica? I asked, crossing my arms. I made a mistake, she said, her voice breaking. I chose wrong and I see that now. I see what I lost. I shook my head, my heart hardened against her pleas. You didn't lose me, Jessica. You threw me away. And now that your perfect life has crumbled, you think you can come back? That's not how it works. She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her for a moment, feeling no satisfaction in her pain, only a deep sense of finality. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. You need to leave, I said firmly. This isn't your home anymore, and I'm not the man you can run to when things go wrong. Her sobs grew quieter, and she nodded, wiping her tears. Without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. As I closed the door, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Jessica's desperation no longer had power over me. I was free, and her fall was hers alone to bear. In the days following Jessica's late-night visit, I found myself reflecting on how far she had fallen. Her desperation, her hollow apologies, her complete unraveling. It was both predictable and tragic. I had known the life she chose with Daniel was unsustainable, but even I hadn't expected her downfall to be this spectacular. The whispers about her misfortune grew louder, carried to me by mutual acquaintances and the inevitable small-town gossip that seemed impossible to escape. Daniel, the man who had been her supposed savior, had discarded her as soon as her novelty wore off. He had replaced her with someone younger, someone flashier, someone who fit better into the world he had crafted for himself. And Jessica? She was left with nothing. It started with her being shut out of Daniel's social circle. Parties she had once been the centerpiece of were now off-limits. Friends she thought she had made turned their backs on her, unwilling to associate with someone no longer tied to Daniel's influence. Her glamorous life had crumbled, leaving her isolated and humiliated. I heard she had tried to keep up appearances, attending events alone and pretending Daniel's absence was by choice. But her facade was thin, easily torn apart by the whispers of those around her. She's desperate, someone said at a dinner I attended, trying to hold on to a lifestyle that isn't hers anymore. I nodded politely, saying nothing, but the words stayed with me. Jessica's professional life wasn't spared either. She had left her stable job to join Daniel's company, assuming her position as his partner would protect her. But when their relationship ended, so did her career. Daniel had no qualms about removing her from the payroll, and without his support, she was left scrambling to find work. The industry wasn't kind to her. No one wanted to hire someone so publicly tied to scandal. It wasn't long before the financial strain became evident. She sold the luxury car Daniel had gifted her, then moved out of the upscale apartment they had shared. I imagined her packing up her designer clothes and shoes, the remnants of a life she could no longer afford. It was hard to reconcile this image with the Jessica I had once loved, the woman who had always been so poised and confident. But what struck me most was how little I felt. Seeing her fall didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it might. Instead, it felt hollow. Her choices had led her here, and while I couldn't deny a sense of vindication, it didn't fill the void her betrayal had left. It didn't make me feel better about what she had done, or about the years I had spent picking up the pieces. What did bring me peace, though, was the realization that I was no longer tied to her. Her struggles were no longer my burden to bear. Her mistakes were no longer my responsibility to fix. I was free, and that freedom was worth more than any revenge could offer. One afternoon, while reviewing a proposal at my office, I received an email from an old mutual acquaintance. It contained no message, just a link to an article. I hesitated before clicking, but curiosity got the better of me. The headline was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. Former partner of scandal-ridden CEO speaks out about relationship and regrets. It was a puff piece, clearly orchestrated by Jessica in an attempt to salvage her reputation. She spoke about her time with Daniel, framing herself as a victim of his manipulative ways. She expressed regret over choices she had made, though her words were carefully vague. I closed the article before finishing it. Jessica's attempt to rewrite her narrative wasn't my concern. She could tell whatever story she needed to survive, but I wasn't interested in being a part of it. That evening, as I sat on my balcony overlooking the city, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Jessica's fall from grace was a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easily a life built on lies can crumble. But it was also a testament to resilience, to the power of moving forward even when the past tries to pull you back. I sipped my drink and smiled to myself. Jessica's story was hers to live, hers to own. My story, however, was far from over. And as I looked out at the horizon, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the best chapters of my life were still ahead of me. Closure isn't something that comes with a single moment or a single decision. It's something you earn over time, piece by piece. For years, I had carried the weight of Jessica's betrayal, even as I rebuilt my life. But when I saw her unravel before my eyes and watched her lose everything she had chosen over us, I felt the final strands of that burden fall away. A few weeks after her article made its rounds, I ran into Jessica by chance. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and I had gone to my favorite cafe to grab a coffee and read the paper. The air was crisp, the streets still waking up, and for once, I wasn't in a hurry. I was flipping through the sports section when I heard her voice. "Ryan?" I froze for a moment, the familiarity of her tone taking me back to a time I didn't want to revisit. Slowly, I looked up, and there she was. Jessica. But she wasn't the woman I had married, nor was she the polished socialite who had once stood at Daniel's side. She was thinner, her face pale and lined with exhaustion. Her clothes were simple, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked ordinary. "Jessica," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Can I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her no, to walk away and leave her standing there. But another part of me, the part that had already made peace with the past, decided there was no harm in hearing her out. "Go ahead," I said, closing the paper and leaning back in my chair. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap and staring at them for a moment before speaking. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." I shrugged. "Life has a way of surprising us." She nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment, it seemed like she didn't know what to say. Then she looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, regret, maybe even hope. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began. "About us. About what I did to you." I didn't respond, letting her continue at her own pace. "I was selfish," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought I knew what I wanted, but I didn't. And in the process, I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to make up for." I studied her, searching for any sign that her words were anything less than genuine. But there was no pretense in her tone, no trace of the woman who had once lied so easily. This wasn't an apology born of manipulation. It was one born of desperation. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she said, her voice breaking, "for everything. I know it's too late to fix what I broke, but I needed to tell you that." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of the years that had passed. For a long moment, I said nothing, letting her apology settle. Then, finally, I spoke. "I appreciate your apology, Jessica," I said, my tone calm but firm. "But the truth is, I don't need it. I've moved on. I've built a life I'm proud of, a life that has nothing to do with you or what happened between us." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "What happened between us, your choices, your betrayal, it doesn't define me anymore. And it shouldn't define you, either. You made mistakes, and now you're dealing with the consequences. That's life. But you still have a chance to start over, to be better. Don't waste it." Her tears spilled over, and she quickly wiped them away, a small, sad smile tugging at her lips. "You've changed, Ryan." "So have you," I said. "We're not the same people we were back then. And that's okay." She nodded again, then stood. "Thank you," she said softly, "for listening." For being kind. You didn't have to, but thank you. I nodded, watching as she walked away, her figure disappearing into the bustling street outside the cafe. I sat there for a long time, staring at my untouched coffee and reflecting on what had just happened. Her apology, her regret, it didn't undo the past, but it didn't need to. What mattered was that I had finally found closure, not from her words, but from within myself. Jessica was a chapter in my life that had ended long ago. Now, I could look back on it without anger or pain, only lessons learned and a sense of peace. My life wasn't defined by her betrayal. It was defined by my resilience, my growth, and my ability to rise above. As I left the cafe that morning, I felt lighter than I had in years. Closure wasn't just about ending something. It was about making room for something new. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. That morning at the cafe marked the true end of an era. Jessica's apology, while unexpected, felt like the last piece of a puzzle I had been trying to complete for years. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about acknowledgement, a recognition of the pain she caused and the man I had become despite it. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting more often, but not on the betrayal. Instead, I thought about my journey, how far I had come, how I had taken the ashes of a broken marriage and built something I could be proud of, a career, a community, and most importantly, a sense of self-worth. My business was thriving. What had started as a small marketing consultancy was now a full-fledged agency with a team of talented individuals who shared my vision. We had just landed our biggest client yet, a contract that would secure us for years to come. But it wasn't just the success that mattered. It was the way I had earned it, through hard work, integrity, and resilience. I didn't need shortcuts or betrayals to achieve my goals. I had proven to myself that I was enough. My personal life had flourished too. After years of focusing solely on work and healing, I had finally opened myself up to the possibility of love again. Her name was Natalie, a warm and compassionate woman with a sharp wit and a kind heart. We met at a charity event, a networking opportunity that turned into something much more. Natalie was different from Jessica in every way. She didn't need the spotlight or constant validation. She valued the little things, quiet mornings with coffee, spontaneous road trips, nights spent laughing over shared stories. With her, I felt at peace. I didn't have to prove anything or pretend to be someone I wasn't. She loved me for me, and that was something I hadn't realized I was missing until I found it. Our relationship was still relatively new, but it felt solid, stable, real. And as we started making plans for the future, talking about merging our lives and maybe even starting a family, I felt a kind of joy I hadn't known was possible. Jessica's story, on the other hand, had become a cautionary tale. Her life continued to spiral, each attempt at a comeback falling flat. She moved to a smaller town, took a lower-paying job, and tried to keep a low profile. Mutual acquaintances mentioned her from time to time, but I no longer felt a pang when her name came up. She was just a part of my past, a chapter that had shaped me but no longer defined me. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my home overlooking the city, I felt a rare moment of stillness. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and the gentle hum of life below reminded me of how far I had come. Natalie joined me, a glass of wine in her hand and a soft smile on her face. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, leaning against the railing. I smiled, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," I admitted. She tilted her head, studying me with those thoughtful eyes I had come to love. "You've worked hard for this life, Ryan. It's not luck, it's you." Her words resonated with me. For so long, I had seen myself as a victim of Jessica's betrayal, as someone who had been broken and needed to rebuild. But now, I saw the truth. I wasn't a victim, I was a survivor, a fighter. And the life I had now wasn't a stroke of luck or chance. It was the result of my own resilience and determination. As the stars began to dot the sky, I made a silent promise to myself to continue growing, to continue striving for a life that was full of meaning and love, to never let the shadows of the past dim the light of my future. Jessica's choices had once consumed me, but now they were just a distant memory. I had reclaimed my life, rebuilt my confidence, and found a happiness that was entirely my own. And as I stood there with Natalie, the woman who had shown me what real love looked like, I knew one thing for certain. The best was yet to come. The past didn't define me. The betrayal didn't define me. I defined me. And the life I had created was proof that even in the face of heartbreak, it's possible to rise, to heal, and to thrive. This was my story now, one of resilience, growth, and hope. And it was only just beginning.